lavalier before you start making off-color comments?
Okay. Forget about that.
People do.
I'm not used to it.
I always believe that life is actually stranger than fiction, and having done some of these events, the only thing funnier than something like that is when a person forgets they have the lavalier on. Not that they go and have a strange comment or something, but all of a sudden they're in the bathroom with the lavalier mic on. That's just strange. That's just strange. It's all right, as I get started here, Clay's going to come join me as we do a quick transition of slides. Okay, I was able to navigate through that transition. What Clay and I would like to do, you want to grab that one?
Sure. We have a second.
There's a second one above. We're going to spend 2 slides introduction, just to make sure people have a context with regards to both Perfecto Mobile as well as Cognizant. So we'll do 1 slide each, and then move you straight into some of the dilemmas that we see, the dilemmas or challenges that we see customers who are working with, are struggling through. Just a word with regards to Perfecto Mobile. Perfecto Mobile offers a cloud-based integrated mobile application quality suite. And that suite is really a full functional and non-functional test suite, where it supports manual test, automated test, performance test, as well as post-production monitoring. Those capabilities are delivered via a mobile cloud, where the real devices that Brian was mentioning, both real devices as well as emulators for those customers choosing that, we offer up real devices connected to real carrier networks distributed around the world. So for example, for those people who are thinking about their own internal device lab, take that full problem out of the equation and use it as device as a service. That's what underlies our portfolio of capabilities, and where we could provide all the governance for that. In addition to that platform, we strongly believe that to make mobile work for organizations, you have to fit into the workflow, the existing workflow. So for example, in the USAA case, Brian mentioned a number of occasions the Hewlett-Packard ALM Application Lifecycle Management Suite, QTP. There were other references on his slides. So we believe we have to support customers in terms of the product choices they've already made and work with those versus creating a new standalone tech silo. So in addition to the HP suite, we have integrations with the IBM Rational Quality Manager suite, as well as the Microsoft Visual Studio suite for those. And as well, in addition, what we're going to see some announcements coming up soon from the organization is with regards to various things we're doing in the open source community to support tools that developers are using right now.
Well, good morning. My name is Clay Simmons, as I had mentioned to you earlier as we were making a round of introductions. By the way, can everybody hear me okay? I think my voice carries, as my wife says, so I'll continue to keep the volume up. So Cognizant's mobile COE is basically an organization across the globe. We have a North American operation here. That's the group that I head up. We also have in Western Europe and Asia Pacific as well. But the organization is really designed to deliver end-to-end testing services all the way from strategy creation to certification of the applications, and everything in between. We support customers with developing scope and objectives, into all the way developing their test strategy. We have labs here in North America and also in Chennai, India as well. These labs have all the tools and accelerators, including the Perfecto tool. We have cloud-based solutions there. We have dedicated clouds for customers. We can develop dedicated clouds and shared environments for customers depending on their requirements. In these ready-to-use environment, ready-to-use labs with all the tools and accelerators. But in addition to all the technology, we also look at the economics of QA. As we know, this is not a P&L operation for large enterprise organizations. It's a cost basis. And so we've got to really look at how we address the value of QA, delivering against risk metrics that the enterprise organization has set forth, and ultimately getting these mobile applications into the marketplace in an affordable fashion. A couple of other notes. We obviously have made significant investments in the market in terms of application development all the way to QA. So we have that entire ecosystem, and hence we obviously have the expertise and scale to support these large enterprise organizations as they mature and grow into mobile application space.
So by way of agenda, we're going to cover 4 aspects. This is the intro. We're going to go ahead and walk you through the key dilemmas. One of them, the first one that many people invariably touch, is just device selection itself. We'll then talk about the ROI, maximizing the ROI around testing, and then wrapping up with regards to a sustainable test strategy. Then we're going to conclude with the demo, as I mentioned earlier, by Brett.
Which, by the way, raise of hands, who participated in the webinar? Were any of you in the webinar by chance? Okay, good. So this is all going to be fresh information for you. Fantastic. Good.
One of the, so again, the 3 things that we're going to hit with regards to device strategy: what fits for your project, how do you go through and make those decisions, how do you actually organize and try to understand the ROI, and then lastly, your strategy. They're beginning to think about the mobile problem is thinking about the many moving parts that are going on. We started out, one of the things that has happened recently, obviously, is the iOS 7 release. We obviously have also as well in terms of Android, the 4.3 release, with KitKat coming out. There are a breadth of choices to make with regards to the applications, the OSs that are available in the platforms out there in the market, and trying to get your arms around that alone. Then, it turns out it's not OS only, because the manufacturers, how they interpret the flavor of Android, as an example, varies platform to platform. The UI experience is also complicated by the virtue of what size screen is up. And so, for example, you could put in your mind iOS 7 or iOS 6, but then there's still 5 platforms with different screen sizes to work through, as an example. In terms of application types, Brian touched on this in terms of, is it going to be a mobile browser app? Will it be a native app? Will it be a hybrid app? All of these have implications, both from a dev perspective, a QA perspective, as well as a monitoring, post-production monitoring perspective. And then lastly, the fit into the ALM cycle overall. And one of the things definitely want to stress, is, as I mentioned earlier, is kind of my working definition of quality. Quality is not only does it work, but is it available and will it perform? And so as we start to take a look in terms of understanding a device strategy, these are the moving parts to factor in.
That's great insight, absolutely. And so this is some of the things that we're seeing in the marketplace today. Quite a shift. So 34% of global workforce will now be mobilized this year. 66% of those workers want to have access to personal information from their devices at any time. And then 90% of the organizations say they'll support corporate applications on personal devices by 2014. So we see a significant shift, obviously, to consumerization. And as you know, the large enterprise definitely weighs in on how the market kind of evolves itself. Noticing what iOS has done within corporate America as well. 65% of the Fortune 500 organizations say they will deploy the iPad, and then 80% say they'll support the iPhone. So again, as you can see, this embracing of these multifaceted devices into large enterprise and their operations. It brings up the question in terms of how do we actually use these devices, because before it was just telephony services and SMS, but now we've got mobile healthcare monitoring, we've got mobile payments, we've got near-field communications, we have GPS. I probably used 3 or 4 of these, even this morning as I was getting ready and coming here to visit with you today. I would say that the devices are obviously getting very complex, and so they definitely have implications to the development and the testing associated to that. This is a slide that coincides nicely with what Carlo had presented from Gartner in his opening remarks. We too see this exact same thing happening in our space as well, where we kind of call this mobile 1.0, and that is mobilizing the web, using the device for a mobile internet browser. It provided new communication methods like FaceTime and Twitter and all the other great methods that we are now communicating over beyond just voice and text. Also 1.0 was an era in which large enterprise organizations developed applications to differentiate themselves. And by the way, this is not really the 1.0 to 3.0 is more of a scale relative to the large enterprise maturity as opposed to any type of timeline. So don't confuse this with a specific timeline, because different enterprise organizations are at different levels within the scale, even today as we speak. Mobile 2.0 though is transforming this enterprise organization into looking at mobile application from business process improvement. It's really adopting secure corporate data, maximizing workforce efficiencies, really again embracing what mobile can do for them as they evolve their business processes. And then as they further mature into mobile 3.0, they become innovative. They develop applications that are purpose-built. They're using the enablers on the device, like GPS, like near-field communications. They're looking at the landscape of the devices, whether it be a tablet or a phone, and they're developing the application very specific and very unique. Ultimately, kind of shifting from that mobile application development differentiation to having the app being developed for the end user to be more dependent. I think Brian even brought that up earlier, that his customers are becoming more dependent on the USAA application. And so we're starting to see that
Just a quick check. Is everyone able to see the slides okay with relative to the glare? I know from this angle I'm having a hard time, so I didn't know if. Good. All right, moving on. As we take a look in terms of the moving parts, again, that I'll mention with mobile, taking a look at the notion of fragmentation. Fragmentation of Android is a particular challenge for organizations choosing how to do test, and therefore, how many platforms to use at what points in time across the testing cycle. And it requires the ability to balance between multiple objectives. There is a crazy large number of distinct flavors out there of Android in the marketplace. Right now there's almost 12,000. Last year there was roughly 4,000 different flavors out in the marketplace. And what you see happening, obviously, is while the OS itself, the basic Android operating system, is being refreshed, there's a long tail of devices using older OS flavors out there. You know, this is one of the big distinctions, for example, between the Android platform relative to the iOS platform. You know, with iOS 7 coming out, and you saw it with iOS 6, it's really in the day one upgrades, what happens by day 30. So for example, for Apple, iOS 6 penetration prior to the iOS 7 release was approximately, I think 93% of all Apple platforms were up on iOS 6. And so therefore they have a fairly rapid transition, not the case with the Android platform. And so very much the same way that Brian discussed being able to how he did his selection. Brian spoke about, for example, user analytics, taking a look at who's actually hitting the back end with the user agent strength, be able to understand what devices are they coming from. That is very insightful data to be able to operate, be able to develop the device strategy. But not only is it who's hitting my site today, or on a look-back basis, who's been hitting my site for the past 6 months, there's also a look-ahead function that's operating in the marketplace in terms of what device, what's coming out, as well as what might be fading away. And so that's a second dimension of the problem itself. And then thirdly is being able to factor in both the network considerations of those OSs in terms of what's the mix of platform and networks that I'm going to be thinking about. For example, if we think for m-commerce applications as an example, frequently that's going to be, from a purchasing perspective, purchasing is going to happen on an iPad. Browsing, research will frequently happen on a smaller device. And so now going back to the tablet format, thinking about, is that going to be typically Wi-Fi connected or on some type of network, some other type of cellular carrier? And being able to put this all into the considerations, because it's not only what platform, what flavor platform, it's also what mode will that be operating in. And putting all of these together to be able to understand how do I arrive at that 6, 12, 30 pool of devices that I'm going to be running my testing through at unit, at regression, at compatibility test.
Actually, if I can just maybe add just one
Oh,
more
sure,
comment to
please.
that. Yeah, that's, so we actually support our customers to kind of limit these devices, exactly as Carlo had mentioned. One of the more interesting aspects, though, is once you have limited it down to a certain subset of devices, you definitely need to validate the parameters against the business requirements. In fact, I had a check-in with a customer 3 or 4 weeks ago that we came up with a list of devices and we presented it to the customer, and the customer actually had a significant problem with the device selection that we provided. We said, hey, well, as Carlo mentioned, we went through the device considerations. We looked at the leading manufacturers. We looked at what was coming out, We looked at the market analytics. We knew you do business here in North America and also in Western Europe. We also looked at the platforms, associated to, the network considerations there in Europe and here in North America. We did all of our due diligence. Said, but you don't understand my business. My business actually has proven that iOS customers, for some strange reason, are more purchasers of our services than other users of different devices. And so we found that very intriguing. So you always got to lay on top, once you have this kind of group of devices, you always have to layer on top your business-specific requirements. And then, and only then, you really have that perfect target set of devices.
Just 2 quick notes with regards to kind of stress the point here. With the iPhone 5s coming out and iOS 7 particularly, taking a look at that launch, the 5S and 5C, 9 million devices in their opening weekend. That's a rapid adoption. So for example, thinking about the week prior, or really the 2 months prior, when people had set up and were operating against iOS 6 for their testing, that's a rapid turnover to be able to catch up and now understand what's the delta between iOS 6 and iOS 7 as it relates to my application portfolio, and being able to be able to manage that. Another dynamic that's happening right now is this is a Gartner quote from September 27th, from a few days ago. Gartner is now saying to those enterprises who are supporting BlackBerry, pause, think about it, place your bets carefully. So as you see things rising, there are also things falling. There are clearly tech winners and losers that are going on right now. And so BlackBerry is closer to the edge. Nothing going on with iOS, with the iOS or Android. Windows Phone 8, question mark. Question mark. Even though there are definitely enterprises who have made big bets on various platforms, it's still the mix between what consumers are doing, what manufacturers are doing, and what the enterprise is choosing. And then, of course, what Clay just mentioned in terms of what are the high-value transactions occurring for your users and which platforms. Because obviously, if you have a high-value application running on BlackBerry to run your business on, that's clearly the right decision to stay the course. But for others who are making brand new bets, eyes wide open. At Perfecto, we have kind of a model. So sometimes customers will ask, well, help me figure this out. Provide me a framework so I can start to think about it. Because yes, you've now entirely convinced me there are a lot of moving parts. You've entirely convinced me that a lot of things to think about. Okay, great. So I now need to take my first step. How do I do that? And so we've come up with this simple idea of must, major, and market devices. And it helps provide a sense of how many devices and for what across the phases. And it's important to think about the phases of actual testing. And so Brian, for example, mentioned from a considerations perspective, during development, during unit test in particular, emulators have a great place as part of the unit test. And so think about that there's probably a small set of devices that you might be able to, that you'll take advantage of during unit, during that first phase and for sanity. And actually, let me pause for a second. What you see really is that the color scheme in the boxes represent kind of the mobile intensity of that particular phase. Sometimes if you're just testing logic, you just need to test the logic. If you're testing the real end user experience, you need the device in hand. And so that provides the color scheme. So obviously for during the compatibility phase, you want to understand if your application runs across the set of devices out there on the market that are important to your strategy. And so what we've observed is that from a must, what's the minimal set of devices that you need to operate? it's probably, and of course tuned to your business, roughly about 6 to 8 devices. That's the bare minimum to get good coverage. And then you take a look in terms of, from a major perspective, if you have a broad consumer application, you really don't know where they're coming from, about a 12 devices, you will get some good coverage in terms of that testing strategy. And then finally, if you're trying to understand a broad market perspective, that's when you need to be up in 30 to 40 devices. So even though if you take a look at the earlier stat that I provided, that there are almost 12,000 flavors of Android out there, you take a look, there's a lot of them on the long tail of older devices that are on the market or infrequently used devices. Focusing in, we've provided a way to think about it both from a phases, from an ALM perspective, as well as a depth perspective in terms of devices. And we can get into this conversation a little bit more as well. The other aspect too is from a device strategy perspective is to think about the refresh rate. So, for example, in the past 12 months, I've gone from, I'm currently on an HTC One device. I just went from, I was on a GS4 prior to that, an iPhone 4S prior to that, and I had a G2. And so that tells you kind of the clock speed. Perhaps I'm rotating devices faster than many out there in the market, but what we think about it in general is about in 9 to 12 months, a quarter of your population is moving, is rotating. So it's not only that initial bet that you've made, the initial device selection that you've made, but also to think about the refresh rate, because that's also needs to be a factor in terms of how you make these decisions and how you remain current given the changes going on in the market.
That's great segue into this total cost of ownership, because as we were putting together this webinar and roadshow, we were really scratching our heads in terms of how do we come together and talk about some of the problems that large enterprise organizations have. And oftentimes they're like, what devices should we be testing? And as soon as we confirm a list of devices, it always comes down to, but I also have emulators, I also have cloud capabilities, I also have these devices. How do I put all this stuff together? And that is a very common question that I get a lot, very often. And so from a Cognizant perspective, we really say you've got to look at it from a combinational approach. In fact, I think Brian said it best. He's actually doing the same thing, and it confirms what the rest of the market's doing. You've got to be addressing both, or all of them, simulators, emulators, physical devices, and cloud-based solutions as well. The thing with physical devices is it provides a level of accuracy, as Carlo had mentioned. You have to have those. You can see exactly what your end user is going to experience when they pick up the phone and use your application. But the problem is you can't just go and procure every single device that exists out in the marketplace. It's economically impossible. Also, too, there's some uncertainty there in terms of the shelf life of these devices. How long are these devices relevant? Are you going to hold on to that G2 and continue to test that application on that G2 over and over again? Chances are no, you're going to have to figure out a process in which you retire devices and you bring new devices on. So there is always that level of uncertainty, is how relevant am I as my device selection strategy to what the market's actually showing. From a platform and simulator perspective, as Brian said, they're inexpensive. They're free, basically. They come with the SDKs from Android and an iOS, and they're very fast, and they're great for unit testing. But as he mentioned, they're also very inconsistent. Just because you test on an emulator or simulator doesn't necessarily mean, in his particular case, it's actually going to function just like it would on a physical device. So it's really good for developers, as he mentioned. I think that was a great point he made. For cloud-based devices, it provides a level of flexibility. You have an assortment of devices that are expansive in terms of the types that you can use and leverage. And it also generates a level of automation as well, to where you can begin to automate against these devices. But there are some costs associated with that as well. So you really have to look at all three and really put together a combinational approach that makes the most sense for your large enterprise organization, for your test strategy, for your test coverage, and for your overall cost requirements.
So moving on to the next aspect of the conversation with regards to ROI itself. You want to speak to this? All me?
Yeah.
I'll take it, then I'll run with it. From an ROI perspective, I think there's a number of ways. One of the things, for example, that I do with my responsibilities, I actually work and sit down with customers to actually build out ROI models, to understand where are the benefits in terms of making this shift. There are a few things that are important to bear in mind as the shift goes. We've already hit the point with regards to the platforms as well as the networks. And I can't underemphasize the issue of networks. Customers, your end users are not only on Wi-Fi, so therefore what speed they're operating on factors into their end user experience. But in terms of the clock speed of the development cycle itself, how that moves tells you in terms of how do I balance, what are my choices that I have? Can I test 1,000 devices, 1,000 test cases, all manual in a 2-week period of time? Maybe not. Maybe not. If I'm thinking about from a continuous QA perspective as well, throughout each of the phases, being able to leverage my testing approach as opposed to an over-the-wall set scenario. What are the enablers that allow me to achieve this? And with this, I wanted to try to give a quick case study for you. We had a customer who was operating about 1,200 test cases. New management came in, and the management said, we are going to make a shift from waterfall to agile. And so their prior strategy was they had about the 1,200 test cases, 4 devices. They had offshored that team, and it was taking them approximately between 16 and 20 days. New management team said with Agile, the new QA budget from a time perspective is 48 hours. And the question becomes, how do I get there from here? How do I get there from here? And a few things emerged as key requirements for them to achieve that. Number one, while they were taking advantage of automation, they were not taking advantage of it completely. And part of that dynamic was they had people babysitting the automation. And so how could you have it automated with manual oversight, basically? They were doing both. And that was the number one place where we attacked the inefficiency. So when you think about automation in this particular scenario, it was not only automating the test case, but thinking about, for example, the fact that devices sometimes require rebooting. Devices sometimes have interoperability events occurring. So it's not only the test case, but it's managing the test scenario. And so when those particular events happen, how does the automation script handle that? And so we specifically built in on-the-fly error handling, on-the-fly resolution of notifications to be able to remove the manual oversight, i.e. that person who had to hit restart the application or restart the device. We handled that through the automation strategy itself. And so what we were able to do was A, eliminate all the manual oversight, then B, from a timing perspective, we parallelized the execution, as Brian said before, that we could put up multiple devices and then run the test execution in parallel. And then thirdly, be able to capture all the test reporting with screenshots and video to identify precisely where the challenges were or the fails were from that test perspective. And the end result was that they were able to save about $40,000 per test cycle, and they were able to squeeze out almost 90% of the test duration. At the end of the day, they went from 16, let's call it 18 days to 42 hours. That's what we were able to help them with. And the point here is that it's not only automation, but I put an adjective in front of automation, which is robust automation. Because I've got to do more than the test case. I've got to manage the test scenario and think about that device is not always the most stable target there is. And I've got to manage that. And those are the way you're able to actually achieve unattended testing in that scenario with the parallelized execution. And so from an ROI perspective, when we're able to think about very concrete strategic objectives, then the technology is how do you back into that and what's required to deliver that. As a footnote to this, if anyone has any further interest in this particular story, we have a case study on our website to go with that.
So Carlo, I get this question all the time. When should I go for automation? In fact, I get more of the question, I get more of the comment, prove to me that automation is worth it. And I usually turn that around when I get that comment quite a bit into more questions for the customer. And these questions usually look something like this. Do you have a lot of reusability in terms of the development, in terms of the application? Is the application just kind of a one-time thing, or do you see this application evolving into version 2.0 and 3.0 and so on and so forth? You get all of a sudden this effect of reusability.
Sure.
From a time perspective, is that important? If you already have assets, script assets and things like this, and you're able to run these scripts in regression, does that improve your overall time and your development cycles? And so that's a question I usually pose back to customers. Is your applications getting more complex as it moves from that version 1.0 to 2.0? Have you added additional capabilities like GPS maybe, or additional screens, or additional transactions, or add security? Things like this. If the applications become more complex, then perhaps then you have already this starting point, just adding and modifying these scripts, improve that level of complexity that you face. Is reliability a concern for you? And I think that it is. Manual testing, we're all humans, we all make mistakes. In manual testing, mistakes can happen. But if you develop scripts, if you fully qualify those scripts, and you trust those scripts, you have a high level of confidence in those scripts, then you eliminate errors that could be incurred by manual testers. There are costs associated with automation, but there's also costs associated with manual testing. As you add any one of these, application complexity or reusability, spawning of different applications and things like this, the cost of manual testing goes up as well. And is that a concern in your large enterprise environment? And then agility as well. Is business coming back to you on a regular basis and saying, hey, we really like what you're doing from this app dev perspective, but we need to add this one other little feature. The market's requiring it. Our competitors are doing something different, and we've got to react to it before we even get this application out. So midstream within the application development lifecycle, you might get a new requirement. And so is that agility needed in your SDLC to support your application going to market? These are the questions that I pose, and usually if they're yes to any one of these, usually automation is a good key to evaluate further.
Sure. So any one of these can be the tipping point, in other words.
That's right. That's right. And so as they say, okay, yes, you sold me on automation, there's a lot of tools out there. which one should I go with? And again, we go back, kind of back to this line of questions. We go back to kind of evaluate the customer's environment. What type of application are you rolling out? Is it hybrid? Is it native? Is it mobile web? Because certain tools only support certain types of application.